Judge William Morris's gavel struck the wooden block with a sharp crack. "Ms. Bennett, this court finds you guilty of the parking violations. That will be £500. Emily Bennett stood tall at the front of the small courtroom. Only a few people sat on the benches behind her, waiting for their own traffic cases to be called. She had tried to explain about the broken meter and even had photos on her phone, but the judge had barely looked at them. "Your Honor, if I could just show you the evidence once more." "Ms. Bennett," Judge Morris cut her off, looking down at her over his glasses, "this court has already made its decision. Pay the clerk on your way out or face additional penalties." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. The money wasn't the problem, she could afford it. What hurt was how quickly he had dismissed her without really listening, while spending nearly 20 minutes carefully reviewing the case of the white man before her. As she gathered her papers, Judge Morris was already calling the next person forward. Emily paused for a moment, thinking about speaking up again, but decided against it. This wasn't the right time. But there would be another. She walked slowly to the clerk's desk, paid the fine, and stepped out into the bright morning sunlight. Emily took a deep breath to calm herself. As the policy advisor to the Home Secretary on judicial reforms, she knew all too well that what had just happened wasn't uncommon. She had spent the last 3 years collecting data on exactly these kinds of disparities in the justice system. Back in her office, Emily placed her bag on her desk and sank into her chair. Her assistant, Tom, appeared in the doorway with a concerned look. "Rough morning in court?" "You could say that," Emily replied, turning on her computer. "Judge Morris didn't even look at my evidence. Just rushed me through while giving the man before me all the time in the world." Tom shook his head. "Not surprising. Morris has a reputation." "Well, his reputation is about to become very useful," Emily said, opening her files. "The Judicial Reform Committee meeting is in 3 weeks. I think I just found our perfect case study." Emily spent the afternoon fine-tuning her presentation. The parking ticket itself was trivial, but what it represented was not. Her team had gathered statistics showing that certain judges consistently gave less time and consideration to cases involving women and minorities. Judge Morris's courtroom showed some of the most striking disparities. That evening, Emily called her grandmother, Mary, who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8. "How did your court date go, love?" Mary asked. "Exactly as I expected, Gran." He barely looked at me. "And you're going to do something about it?" "I am," Emily confirmed. "But not in the way he might expect." "That's my girl," Mary said proudly. "Your grandfather always said the best response to injustice isn't anger, it's action." Emily smiled at the memory of her grandfather, a civil rights lawyer who had inspired her career path. "I miss him, Gran. He would be so proud of you, Emily. So proud." Over the next few days, Emily gathered more evidence. She reviewed security footage from the courthouse, which showed Judge Morris's different treatment of various defendants clear as day. She interviewed other people who had appeared before him and added their experiences to her report. The Judicial Reform Committee was made up of senior judges, lawmakers, and policy experts. Judge Morris, as one of the most experienced circuit judges, was a key member. Emily knew he would be attending the upcoming meeting. A week before the meeting, Emily received a call from the Home Secretary himself. "Ms. Bennett, I've reviewed your preliminary findings. They're concerning." "Yes, sir. The disparities are quite clear." "And you believe this training program you're proposing would help address the issue?" "I do, sir. Most of these biases are unconscious. Making judges aware of them is the first step toward change." "Very well. You'll have 30 minutes to present at the committee meeting. Make them count." Emily hung up and looked at the photo on her desk, her grandparents at a civil rights march in the 1960s. Her grandmother stood tall with a sign that read "Justice for all, not just some." "Don't worry, Gran," Emily whispered. "I'll make those 30 minutes count." The end 3 weeks later, Judge William Morris adjusted his tie as he walked toward the government building. The Judicial Reform Committee meeting had been called with little notice, and as the senior judge for the county, he was expected to attend. His footsteps echoed in the grand hallways as he followed his assistant to the meeting room. Inside, officials from across the region sat around a large oak table. He spotted a familiar face, the woman from traffic court, now dressed in a professional dark blue suit, speaking quietly with the Home Secretary. Judge Morris, his assistant whispered, "That's Emily Bennett, the Home Secretary's special policy advisor on judicial reform. I hear she's the one who organized this meeting." Judge Morris felt the color drain from his face as he remembered their brief encounter. He had been in a rush that day, grumpy after staying up all night caring for his ill wife. But deep down, he knew he hadn't given Ms. Bennett's case the attention it deserved. When their eyes met across the room, she gave him a small, knowing nod. The committee chairman called the meeting to order. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on such short notice. We have an important presentation today from Ms. Emily Bennett regarding some concerning patterns in our judicial system." Judge Morris took his seat, trying to appear calm while his heart raced. Had she called this meeting because of how he had treated her? Was he about to be publicly shamed in front of his colleagues? Emily walked to the front of the room with confidence. She placed her laptop on the podium and connected it to the projector. The screen lit up with the title, "Unconscious Bias in the Judicial System, Patterns and Solutions." "Good morning," Emily began, her voice clear and steady. "For the past 3 years, my team has been conducting a comprehensive study of case handling across our region's courts." Judge Morris watched as she presented chart after chart showing disparities in how different judges treated different types of defendants. The data was compelling, showing clear patterns of unequal treatment based on gender, race, and social class. "Our research shows that even the most experienced judges can fall into patterns of unconscious bias," Emily continued. "These biases affect everything from speaking time allocated to defendants, to the likelihood of considering evidence, to the severity of fines and sentences." Judge Morris felt his colleagues glancing his way occasionally. Did they know about his encounter with Emily? He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Let me be clear," Emily said, as if reading his mind, "this is not about individual judges. It's about a system that allows these unconscious biases to go unchecked. We are all products of our environment and upbringing. The question isn't whether we have biases, we all do. The question is whether we're willing to recognize them and work to overcome them." Judge Morris felt a small measure of relief. She wasn't singling him out after all. But then Emily clicked to the next slide, and his stomach dropped. "Let me share a personal experience," she said. 3 weeks ago, I appeared in traffic court for a disputed parking ticket. I had evidence that the meter was broken, including time-stamped photos. The screen showed security footage from his courtroom. Judge Morris watched himself barely glancing at Emily's evidence before ruling against her, then immediately giving full attention to the next case, a businessman whose case was remarkably similar to Emily's, but who received a favorable ruling. The room was silent. Judge Morris could feel the weight of his colleagues' stares. "I chose not to identify the judge or the court in my presentation materials," Emily continued. "Because this isn't about public shaming. It's about awareness and improvement." For the remainder of her presentation, Emily outlined a proposed judicial training program focused on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias. The program would include regular review of courtroom footage, anonymous feedback from court attendees, and workshops led by experts in the field. When Emily finished, the Home Secretary was the first to speak. "Thank you for your thorough work, Ms. Bennett. I believe this committee should seriously consider implementing your proposed training program." As the meeting adjourned, Judge Morris found himself rooted to his chair, unable to move. He watched as the room emptied, leaving just him and Emily, who was gathering her materials. After a moment of hesitation, he stood and approached her. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I couldn't help but recognize myself in your presentation. I wonder if we might have a word." Emily looked up at him, her expression unreadable. After a brief pause, she nodded. "I was hoping you might say that, Judge Morris. There's a small cafe downstairs. Shall we?" The E&D. They sat across from each other in the small cafe on the ground floor of the government building. Judge Morris stirred his tea slowly, trying to gather his thoughts. Emily Bennett sat quietly, giving him time to speak first. "I owe you an apology," he finally said, looking up from his cup. "I didn't give your case proper attention that day in court." Emily nodded but remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I've been a judge for over 20 years, he went on. "I've always prided myself on being fair and impartial. To see myself on that screen today..." His voice trailed off. "It's not easy to confront our own blind spots," Emily said gently. "Most people never do." Judge Morris looked at her directly. "Why didn't you name me in your presentation? You could have used me as your example. Made me the face of the problem." Emily took a sip of her tea before answering. "Because public shaming rarely leads to real change, Judge Morris. It just makes people defensive. And defensive people don't learn. You sound like you've given this a lot of thought." "My grandfather was a civil rights lawyer," Emily explained. "He taught me that true progress comes when people see the truth for themselves, not when it's forced on them." Judge Morris nodded slowly. "Your grandfather was a wise man." "He was," Emily agreed with a small smile. "He also taught me that systems don't change overnight. It takes people inside those systems to recognize the problems and work to fix them." Judge Morris sat back in his chair, considering her words. "You know, my wife has been telling me for years that I sometimes treat women differently in my courtroom. I always dismissed her concerns. Told her she was imagining things." "And now?" Emily asked. "Now I owe her an apology too," he admitted. "The evidence was right there on the screen. I can't deny it anymore." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The cafe bustled around them, people coming and going, unaware of the important conversation taking place in the corner. "What happens now?" Judge Morris finally asked. "That depends on you," Emily replied. "My proposal goes before the full committee next month for a vote. If it passes, the training program will become mandatory for all judges in the region." Judge Morris tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. "There will be resistance. Many of my colleagues won't appreciate being told they have biases they need to address." "I expect that," Emily nodded. "Change is never easy, especially when it challenges people's self-image." Judge Morris suddenly straightened in his chair. "What if..." he began, then paused. "What if I spoke in favor of your proposal at the next meeting?" Emily's eyebrows raised in surprise. "You would do that? It would be more powerful coming from someone inside the system, wouldn't it? Someone who can stand up and say, 'I've seen the evidence, including evidence of my own behavior, and we need this program.'" For the first time, Emily smiled widely. "That would be incredibly helpful, Judge Morris. But are you sure? Some of your colleagues might not understand." "Let them judge me," he said with a small laugh at his own pun. "It's time I faced some judgment myself." Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "If you're serious, I have some additional materials that might help you prepare for the next meeting. Studies, personal testimonies, more data." Judge Morris took the folder. "I'm serious, Ms. Bennett. 20 years on the bench, and I've never had my eyes open like they were today. I can't ignore what I've seen." As they finished their tea, Emily shared more details about her proposed training program. Judge Morris listened intently, occasionally asking questions or offering insights from his years of experience. "You know," he said as they prepared to leave, "my daughter is studying law at university. She's always challenging me about the justice system, telling me it needs to change. I usually tell her she's too idealistic." "And now?" Emily asked. "Now I think I'll tell her she's right," he replied with a smile. "And that I'm trying to be part of that change." They walked together to the building exit. Before parting ways, Judge Morris extended his hand. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Not just for not humiliating me today, but for giving me a chance to do better." Emily shook his hand firmly. Sometimes all any of us needs is that chance, Judge Morris. As they went their separate ways, both felt a sense of hope they hadn't expected when the day began. Sometimes the most unexpected allies emerge from the most unlikely encounters. The next 4 weeks passed quickly as Judge Morris and Emily worked together to prepare for the full committee vote. They met twice a week in the same small cafe, going over research and planning their presentation. Judge Morris had spent his evenings reading through the materials Emily had given him. The statistics were eye-opening. Men received an average of 3 more minutes of speaking time than women in court. Black defendants were interrupted twice as often as white defendants. Fines for similar offenses varied by up to 30% depending on the defendant's appearance and manner of speech. One evening, he brought the research home and showed it to his wife, Margaret. "You were right all these years," he admitted as they sat at their kitchen table. "I didn't want to see it." Margaret reached across and squeezed his hand. "What matters is that you see it now, William." The day before the committee vote, Judge Morris invited Emily to meet his daughter, Rebecca, who was home from university for the weekend. They met at a small restaurant near the courthouse. "Dad has told me all about your work," Rebecca said excitedly after introductions. "I can't believe he's finally listening to someone about judicial bias." Judge Morris laughed. "I should have been listening to you all along, it seems." "I've been telling him for years that the system needs reform," Rebecca explained to Emily. "He always said I didn't understand the complexities." "And now?" Emily asked, looking at Judge Morris. "Now I'm the one learning about complexities I never recognized before," he admitted. Their meal was filled with passionate discussion about law and justice. As they were finishing, Rebecca looked at her father with pride. "You know, Dad, when I first decided to study law, I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of a system I saw as flawed. But seeing you willing to change after all these years gives me hope." Judge Morris felt his eyes grow moist. "Thank you, Rebecca. That means more than you know." The next morning arrived with gray skies and light rain. Judge Morris dressed carefully in his best suit, rehearsing what he planned to say to the committee. This would be the most important speech of his career. The committee room was packed when he arrived. Many judges had brought their clerks and assistants, filling the observer seats at the back. Emily was already there, setting up her presentation materials. Nervous, he asked as he approached her. "A bit," she admitted. "You?" "Terrified," he said with a smile. "But certain." The committee chairman called the meeting to order promptly at 10 a.m. "Today we vote on Ms. Bennett's proposal for mandatory judicial bias training. Before we proceed to the vote, Judge William Morris has asked to address the committee." A murmur ran through the room as Judge Morris took his place at the podium. Many were surprised to see him supporting the proposal, given his reputation as a traditionalist. "Colleagues and friends," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I have served as a judge for over 20 years. In that time, I have handed down thousands of rulings, always believing I was guided solely by the law and the facts before me." He paused, looking around the room. "I was wrong." The room fell silent. "For weeks ago, I sat in this room and watched footage of myself dismissing a case without proper consideration. I watched myself giving one defendant merely seconds to present evidence while allowing another defendant with a similar case several minutes. The only difference between these defendants was their gender and race." Some of his fellow judges shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I could offer excuses. I was tired that day. I was distracted by personal matters. But the truth is simpler and harder to face. I allowed unconscious bias to affect my judgment." Judge Morris looked at Emily, who gave him an encouraging nod. "None of us likes to believe we carry biases," he continued. "Especially those of us entrusted with upholding justice. But the data Ms. Bennett has gathered is irrefutable. These biases exist in all of us, and they affect how we administer justice every day." He held up the folder of research Emily had given him. "I've spent the past month reviewing these materials. The evidence is clear. Our system has built-in inequities that we have the power and the duty to address. Judge Morris looked around at his colleagues, many of whom he had known for decades. I stand before you today not to criticize or condemn, but to ask for your support. Ms. Bennett's training program offers us a chance to become better judges, to serve justice more faithfully. I urge you all to vote in favor of this proposal, not despite your years of experience, but because of them. True wisdom lies in recognizing that we always have more to learn. As Judge Morris returned to his seat, the room remained silent for a moment before erupting into discussion. Emily caught his eye across the table and mouthed two words, "Thank you." The end. 6 months later, Judge William Morris stood before a packed auditorium of judges and legal professionals. Behind him was a screen showing the title recognizing unconscious bias in judicial decisions. The training program that had started as Emily's proposal was now in full swing, with today marking its official launch across the entire region. When Ms. Bennett first approached me about supporting this training program, I was defensive, he admitted to the audience. Nobody wants to believe they have biases, especially those of us trusted to uphold justice. In the front row, Emily nodded encouragingly. She wore a smart green dress and looked calm and confident, quite different from the nervous woman who had stood before him in traffic court that day. But true justice requires humility and constant self-examination, Judge Morris continued. In my 20 years as a judge, I've made thousands of decisions. How many were influenced by things I wasn't even aware of? How many lives were affected? The room was silent as his words sank in. Many of the judges present had initially opposed the training program, arguing that their experience and professionalism protected them from bias. But the vote 6 months ago had passed by a narrow margin, and now they were all required to participate. I was lucky, Judge Morris said. I had the chance to see my own bias clearly, thanks to Ms. Bennett's research. And I had the opportunity to choose how to respond to that knowledge. He clicked to the next slide, which showed early results from judges who had already completed the training. Court observers had noted measurable improvements in how these judges handled cases, more consistent rulings across different groups, more equal speaking time allowed, and increased public trust in their courts. The results speak for themselves, he said. We're making progress. Real progress. After the presentation, Judge Morris mingled with his colleagues at the reception. Many approached him with questions or to share their own moments of realization about bias in their courtrooms. Some still seemed skeptical, but most were engaged and thoughtful. Emily found him near the refreshment table, talking with a young judge who had just been appointed to the bench. Judge Morris, she said with a smile, the presentation was excellent. I had good material to work with, he replied. And speaking of that, there's someone I'd like you to meet. He turned to the young judge beside him. Emily, this is my daughter, Rebecca. She's just been appointed to the family court bench. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Rebecca Morris? I had no idea you were Judge Morris's daughter. Rebecca laughed. I don't usually advertise it. I wanted to make my own way. She shook Emily's hand warmly. But I have to thank you. Your work didn't just change my father's approach to justice, it helped convince me that the system could change, that it was worth being part of. The three of them chatted for a while, discussing Rebecca's new position and the challenges she anticipated. As they talked, the Home Secretary approached their group. Ms. Bennett, Judge Morris, he greeted them. I wanted to congratulate you both. The early feedback on this program has been remarkable. We're already seeing changes in public perception of our courts. Thank you, sir, Emily replied. But most of the credit goes to Judge Morris. His willingness to speak out made all the difference. Judge Morris shook his head. The credit belongs to Ms. Bennett, who chose to create change rather than seek revenge when she was treated unfairly. The Home Secretary looked between them with appreciation. Perhaps the credit belongs to both of you. It's not often we see such productive collaboration across such different perspectives. As the reception wound down, Judge Morris and Emily found themselves standing near the large windows overlooking the city. Did you ever imagine, that day in traffic court, that we'd end up here? He asked. Emily smiled. Actually, I did hope something like this might happen. Though I didn't expect you to embrace it so completely. Neither did I, he admitted. My wife says I'm a changed man. My clerk says I'm a better judge. And what do you say? Emily asked. Judge Morris looked out at the city lights before answering. I say I'm fortunate. Not everyone gets the chance to see their mistakes and correct them. Not everyone meets someone willing to help them do better rather than simply point out what they did wrong. As they parted ways that evening, both felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond professional success. They had created something important together, a path toward a more just system. And in doing so, they had demonstrated that change was possible, even in the most traditional institutions, when people were brave enough to look in the mirror and honest enough to acknowledge what they saw there. The end.